So, I forget the term. Content warning. I've never had to issue a content warning before. And I never really, and I don't actually think I need to, but today we're going to talk about sex. I'm just going to let you know in advance. We're celebrating Our Whole Lives, which I think maybe I didn't even explain very well. Our Whole Lives is this comprehensive sexuality education program. I think we missed that part. So if you were here new going, what is OWL? What are they talking about? That's what that is. So content warning. I blame Socrates, or maybe Descartes, or maybe 1,000 other philosophers and theologians from our ancient and Western traditions. Whomever it was that broke us apart, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps to study us, to know this human being better. Whomever it was that decided that this body was a separate and different thing than this mind, and that this heart, the seat of emotions, was something different entirely. Whomever it was that in the breaking of this human being decided that the body was the lesser thing, the profanity, worthy of disgust or contempt, something to be used and suffered within. They broke us apart, and then they forgot to put us back together. It was sometime in my middle school years, I can't really remember whether it was 6th, 7th, or 8th grade, somewhere in there. Somewhere in that age between 11 and 13, and I sat in a classroom with a bunch of my male-identified classmates. Before us stood our physical education teacher. And for the next, maybe 2 weeks or so, I don't remember how long this lasted, our teacher would not be teaching us how to do a layup or how to defend against a corner kick. This unit was sex ed. And we boys were nervous and uncomfortable. We had been separated from the girls, who were off in another part of the building, presumably learning the same stuff. But somehow we weren't going to do so together. I don't know if they were uncomfortable, but we were. But not nearly as uncomfortable as the gym teacher. I'm not sure what kind of background he had in sex education, and I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say he probably had some kind of training and was also probably fairly constrained by public school curricula. But let's just say he clearly knew much more about setting a good pick on the basketball court than anything on the material of sex. In any case, we learned what I later referred to as the plumbing exercise, right? The sexual anatomy of men and women. Our teacher would mumble the words like penis, scrotum, semen, vulva, vagina, and uterus, barely audible. I mean, the women's, and the man takes it, barely audible, clearly ashamed to say the words out loud. I will note, this isn't in my script, but I will note, the man had no problem with a lot of euphemisms for those things. Running track. He would call us a lot of things. But never penis. Anyway, and this was also wonderful. He was never could he get the word masturbation out of his mouth. And he would stumble through it something like, when you're alone and you we didn't. We figured it out more or less. Despite all this, we got the basics of how a woman gets pregnant with a baby, and we got these horrifying lectures on the dangers of sexually transmitted diseases. Contraception was discussed in 2 ways. don't have sex. And number 2, if you do have sex, shame on you. If you do have sex, shame on you. Wear a condom. There was no discussion on what a condom was. And we only figured that out when my friend David stole one from his dad's nightstand, and we huddled around it at lunch like it was the Holy Grail. The message I got: don't have sex. Those feelings you are going to have when you start puberty are all shameful. And if you have sex, you will almost certainly, 100% chance, that you're going to make someone pregnant and at the same time develop a serious disease, and your family will be ashamed. All of which was pretty much okay with me at the time, because at no point in his lectures did our gym teacher ever talk about exactly how one has sex. I mean, I think we got the general gist, but mostly by implication. There was zero talk about intimacy, about bodily autonomy, about agency. The gendered binary and heterosexuality was a given and assumed. Pleasure was completely disregarded. We never spoke of the thousands of sexualized messages we are inundated with from nearly every corner of our society, which confused us because of their ubiquity, and yet were never talked about. We never discussed sexual assault. We never talked about values. We never spoke of consent. And to this day, I have no idea what they told the girls. And I'm guessing if you are around my age or older, this scenario of sex ed in public school was similar to your own. Maybe the conversation didn't even happen at your school. Maybe you got the talk from one of your parents who were probably less well informed than even my gym teacher, and much more uncomfortable. Now, some of you, I hope, had better information, more thoughtful parents or teachers. But most folks I've talked to, again, of my generation or older, certainly, only understood their sexuality through trial and error. Experiences, good and bad, and lots of really unhelpful messages from society. And friends, this is a problem. It is a problem that perpetuates this misinformation. It perpetuates rape culture. It perpetuates sexual assault. Anyway, fast forward. When I was in my 30s, late 30s, and a member of the Unitarian Church in Des Moines, a friend approached me and asked if I would like to become a facilitator in the Our Whole Lives program. I'd heard about Al. I thought it was really cool that a church would teach sexuality education as part of their program. I thought that was amazing. It's kind of what got me interested in Unitarian Universalism in general. When you walk in and they tell you, yeah, we teach sex. It made sense to me. Values, relationships, wholeness. Of course, I immediately said, hell no. Given my education, such as it was, on the matter of sex, I was really clear that I had no business teaching anyone else. It took him 3 years to change my mind on that. Very patient man. Scott Clare, thank you. 3 years to change my no to a yes and enroll me in the OWL training. And upon that yes, I finally understood what I had missed. I finally understood that somewhere along the line I had received the message that bodies were separate from minds and emotions, and that perhaps, say for work, what we do with our bodies was a matter never to be discussed, never to be enjoyed. Someone somewhere along the line had broken my whole humanness apart and never put it back together. A brief background on OWL, for those of you who aren't really in the circle on that. The Our Whole Lives curricula was actually preceded in the Unitarian Universalist Association by a curriculum called AYS, About Your Sexuality, which started in the 1970s and was revised several times through the 70s and 80s. And then in the 1990s, the United Church of Christ and the UUA, the Unitarian Universalist Association, joined together to write an OWL curricula, first for grades 7 to 9. And that's the kind of the core curriculum that we celebrated today, the end of. And that was first published in 1999. That curricula has expanded to include curricula for kindergarten first graders, 4th through 6th grades, 10th to 12th grade, so the high school students, right? And each of these are age appropriate. You know, we don't need to teach everything to the kindergartners. They're not going to get it. But teach them their body parts and their body autonomy, and you've gone a long way. Right? So there are also, by the way, curricula for young adults, 18 to 35-year-olds, adults, and the most recent one is what I call our elders' sexuality education. The entire lifespan we have curricula for. Each program is supplemented by another kind of an extra add-on called Sexuality in Our Faith. They're a little bit different from the UCC and the UUA perspective. Each program, as I said, delivers age-appropriate, scientifically sound, fact-based, and values-discerning information. And OWL facilitators are trained to offer this curricula. How many, I kind of know, but how many of you have ever taken that curricula? I know, well, of course, David, and we have a bunch in this congregation already, which is amazing. It's great. And one of the great things about OWL, especially the curricula we completed and are celebrating today, is how these facilitators create a safe space for the myriad of questions we have about sex and sexuality. And every question is taken seriously. And if the facilitator knows the answer, they'll answer it. And if not, they're like, I don't know that. I'm going to research it and come back next week and we'll find out. And often, as I have observed, our young students will test that boundary. We have a question box. So students can just write an anonymous question, put it in, the question box stays open, gets read, and they answer the question. But often young students will at first test that boundary. I've heard questions based on slang terms that were very new to me. I've heard questions that seem to be based on something found in a very dark corner of the internet. Right? But the point is that unlike my gym teacher, uncomfortable and mumbling terminology, our OWL facilitators take the questions earnestly, and in so doing, here's what happens. They establish this deep trust that these adults are the kind of people that we can rely on, that aren't going to mumble their words, aren't going to shame, aren't going to scare us. We can trust them. That deep trust in that these adults will not be so uncomfortable with these topics that the rest of the world considers taboo. When I ask folks who have taken OWL and facilitators who have taught it, one of the common phrases that arises is that OWL is life-saving. Life-saving. Life-saving in that we finally get to have our questions taken seriously. Life-saving is that in that we get to have conversations that almost no one in the rest of the world is having. Life-saving in that we learn to trust ourselves and others enough to be honest about our feelings, our urges, and our desires. Life-saving in that we may say out loud, or sometimes just whisper to ourselves, that we are exactly who we were made to be, and that no voice can tell us that we don't fit, or that who we love and how we love is unacceptable. Life-saving in that if we so freely choose, we need not engage our sexual being at all. Life-saving in that when we know each other, when we know ourselves, and enter into mutual relationships, when we offer our vulnerability and our empathy and our trust and our acceptance with an open heart and a just mind, we become part of something greater than ourselves alone. One of the things that I love about our OWL curriculum, the whole structure, no matter what grade level or age level we're talking about, is it's kind of organized around these 5 circles of sexuality. And this is the part that I missed in junior high school, right? So first there's sexuality or sexual health and reproduction. That is what I got in junior high, right? Barely. Just that piece. But there's more, right? There's intimacy. How do we experience mutual closeness with another person? I got to be honest with you. In 7th grade or 6th grade or whenever I wasn't terribly interested in sex. I just, how do you know if a girl likes you? Was the question. Like, I didn't need to know the other stuff, right? At that point. How do you develop intimacy? And then there's a circle of sensuality and that's about our awareness of our own bodies, the desires and hungers, the image we have of ourselves, our acceptance and enjoyment of ours and other bodies. And then there's a whole sphere of sexual identity, and that's how we understand ourselves as sexual beings, our gender identity, our gender expression, our roles, our sexual orientation, not only our own, but understanding the wonderful, broad breadth of all of that. And then there is that part of our sexual education called sexualization. And this seemed really important to me because it's how we in our culture uses sexuality to influence and control or manipulate others. It's the thousands upon thousands of sexualized images and songs and media and everything that come at us that we never get to talk about because it's taboo. And all of these intersect at the junction of our values. Now, I can go on, and sometimes I do, about the virtues of Our Whole Lives program, but I want you to pay attention to the name of the program, Our Whole Lives. That whole, it could be referencing time, yeah? We are sexual beings for our entire lives, whole lives, your whole life. And that's true. And that's why we have curricula from kindergarten through our elders. But here's the thing. I think there's something else about that word whole. I think it's referencing the wholeness of our being, that wholeness that some ancient Western philosopher, theologian dude broke apart and forgot to put back together. Our whole lives is about sexuality, but it isn't just about sexuality. One of our OWL facilitators, Jamie wrote this to me the other day. He put it this way. I thought this was great. He said, our sexuality and our understanding of sexuality is central to our humanity. Whole people have a healthy attitude about their bodies, their attraction to other people, and even to the quirks and kinks of their fantasies. Whole people are not threatened by people who express their sexuality in non-binary or non-heteronormative ways. Whole people see their place in working for justice and in support of marginalized folk. Whole people are healthy people. Whole people aren't threatened by, aren't afraid of difference. Whole people seek justice. Whole people know that their wholeness, their body, their mind, their heart calls them to be in the world. They know what that calls them to be in the world, to be free and authentically themselves, a manifestation of the divine. Whole people have a deep desire to be connected to other whole people, or connected to people not yet whole, but need us to love them there anyway. Whole people don't sexually assault women in dressing rooms. Whole people don't abuse children. Whole people don't pass laws banning transgender medical care. Whole people recognize the agency of a woman to choose for herself when and under what conditions she will be pregnant. Whole people are neither passive nor aggressive. Whole people will not be victims, nor can they be victimizers. Whole people are awakening to love. So here's my urging, my big ask this morning. There are so precious few spaces in our world where we can talk openly and honestly about our whole lives, including our sexuality. And for many of us, we have never been able to do so. Our gym teachers couldn't do it. Our parents could only do so much, limited by their own knowledge and experience. And sex and sexuality is generally and strangely considered a taboo subject in polite company. I believe it should not be. And we have access, we here in this room have access to some of the best means of changing that for our communities, not just us here in this room and not just our kids, but all of us and all of our community. So I invite, I encourage, I beg you, begin now to build up this OWL program beyond our 7th to 9th grade curriculum. Form groups that engage young adults and elder programs that are available, knowing that we are never done learning and growing as whole human beings. Get even more facilitators. We have many, but we could always use more. Get more facilitators trained so we can offer the high school curricula along with the kindergarten and first grade and the 4th and 6th grade curricula. Support the church financially in having those facilitators trained. It does cost money. Help organize classes, talk to friends, talk to family members, invite them in, and get them enrolled. In our Mill Creek values, beliefs, and mission, in what I call our DNA, we claim that transformation is possible. It says transformation from brokenness to wholeness, from oppression to power, from unjust to just, from separateness to relationship, from isolation to beloved community. I argue here today that this is what our whole lives is about. Transforming from brokenness and wholeness, transforming from isolation to beloved community. The possibility of that kind of life-saving transformation. Transformation that begins with knowing, at long last, in our bodies, in our wholeness as human beings, as manifestations of divinity in this world. This is a gift we have before us to offer this world, not just us, but to every human being seeking wholeness in this life and in this love. Amen, my friends. And I love you, and may we live this blessing.